In this tutorial, we are going to set up our first cloud flow in Power Automate. So let's jump right into it. We're on the create page in Power Automate. And what we're going to do is we're going to set one up from scratch. We're not going to use a template. And we're going to create an automated cloud flow. So that's our first option here under the start from blank section. So let's go ahead and click on that. Now we can create a flow name here. It's not required. We can add it later. And then we can also select a trigger down here. And you can also see that you can just simply skip these steps here. And it'll take you right to the build page where you can do everything from there. So if you want to search for a trigger here, you can. And if you want to add a flow name, you can. But what we're going to do is we're just going to skip, go right to the build page. And from here, we're going to build our flow. So it's going to take a couple seconds to load. And now we can search for our connector or trigger. And we're going to create a very simple flow that is going to be triggered by us receiving an email. So we can search for our trigger using the search bar here. And so we're just going to simply type in email. And now you can see we've got some suggested triggers down here. And what we'll choose is when a new email arrives, and we're going to select the version 3 for Outlook 365. So now we have our trigger selected. And what we need to do is we need to set up this action a little bit further. So now it's going to connect to your Office 365 Outlook. And in this case, I'm already connected. So I've got my inbox selected here for folder. But if I want to, I can actually choose a different folder here. I can go here and I can select a subfolder from my inbox, or I can just leave it at inbox. So for this example, we're just going to leave it with inbox. But one thing I suggest, I always recommend that you do when you're setting up this when a new email arrives as your trigger, is actually select a subfolder. And what you can do is you can set up an Outlook rule that will move that particular email into a subfolder, and then from there Power Automate will trigger. And the reason I suggest that is just so that Outlook will move the email into the subfolder very quickly, whereas Power Automate might take a few extra seconds to move. And during that time, you might be in your inbox, or if it's a shared inbox, someone else might be in there, and it could potentially disrupt your flow trigger. But for this example, again, we're just going to use inbox as our folder. Now you have this option here for show advanced options, and we can click on that and we can see like it's got a few different things that we can set up, that we can customize. So we can add a few things here. So for this example, I'm going to trigger my flow from an email that I'm going to send to myself. So I don't need to put anything in the to line because this is to myself, but I will put in the from line. I will put in my own email. So I'm going to go ahead and select myself from here. And this email is not going to have any attachments, but if you wanted it to include attachments, you could choose yes there, because you might want to later on in the flow have it grab the attachments and save it somewhere, and from there you're going to do something further. And then you can also put in a subject filter, and obviously the more you customize this, the more that Power Automate will know to grab the right email to trigger your flow. So in this case, we definitely want to put in a a subject filter, and I'm going to use the word test for this example. So I'm just going to put test there, and then you can also adjust the importance, and then you can select it so that it only grabs ones with attachments. But for now, this is good for us. So now that this action is done, we can add our next step. But there is one more thing I want to mention, and that's whenever you're creating a flow, I always recommend that you customize the action labels. So the label of this action is when a new email arrives, v3, and that's the Power Automate generic label that it gives this action. But you can actually edit it, or I should say rename it, by clicking on the ellipses, and then it gives you the rename option here. And what I do, and this is just for my own process, how I set up flows, is I actually leave the name of the original name of the action. And then I put in a colon, and then I add some additional information. Now this is just a trigger, so I'm going to leave it as it is. I'm not going to add anything extra. But as we add an additional action here, I'll show you further what I mean by that and why I edit these. And I leave the original title, and then I add some extra information after the original title, is because I share these flows with my team. And that way, if any editing needs to be done by myself or others, they're going to know exactly what that action, the original name of that action is. And it kind of helps things, helps to keep things with some order and some like understanding of what action is being used here, that you can just look with a quick glance and know what it is, right? So you can collapse this action by clicking up here on the action title, and that will collapse it just to keep things visually clean. But of course, you don't have to do that to click the next step, but just collapsing it keeps it clean. If we go and click on new step, it's going to collapse that automatically, right? But now if we want to reopen it, we can click up here and reopen it. And now when we click on new step, we get this choose an operation, and we need to now select a new action. And what we're trying to do here is when a new email arrives, we want to post in Teams. So we're going to know that we need to find a Teams connector. So we can just go ahead and search here, Teams. And now we have right here in the suggested connectors, we have Microsoft Teams. And of course, down here, you can see a list of suggested Microsoft Teams actions. But obviously, if you scroll down, you're going to see more actions that are not specific to Microsoft Teams. You're going to see these premium custom actions or custom connectors down here. And if you just want to see only Microsoft Teams actions, then you can click on the Microsoft Teams connector icon right here. So if we click on that, it's only going to show us Microsoft Teams actions. We can scroll down and we can see all of them here. Sometimes there's a lot, and you might have to click on a show more to see all of them. But now we can see every single Microsoft Teams connector that is available to us. And if we click on this little see more, it's going to show us all of them. But in this case, everything was already there. Now, you might want to know more about Microsoft Teams connectors, actions, and you can go to the documentation page to see those and get more details on exactly what these are. So if we click on the little icon here, the little information icon, and you see the little learn more link here, if we click on that, it's going to open a new tab and take you to that documentation page. And then it'll take you right to that particular action. So here we clicked on add a member to a team, and it took us right to that section on the documentation page called add a member to a team. And then you can see a description. This operation adds a member to a team. And then it gives you the parameters there. So some more useful information if you're not exactly sure what does that action do and how does it work, you can do that. So again, we're only seeing the Microsoft Teams actions. And what we want to do is we want it to post in a Microsoft Teams channel. And there's quite a few actions here. So we can try to narrow it down. So we can type in some keywords here. So here I'm just putting in post, and let's see what our options here. This looks really close to what we want here. Post a message in a chat or channel. So I'm going to click on that. And now I see post as and post in and no other advanced options. So really this is it, but we might get more options once we select these required fields. Now you can see where it says post as and it's got Flowbot. So it's going to post as something called Flowbot, but I might want to actually have it post as myself or even a different user. So I'm going to actually change this by clicking on the drop down arrow here for more options, and I'm going to select user. Right, so now it's going to post as me. And what I want to do next is I want to choose a specific channel, right? Teams channel. So I'm going to select channel. And now you can see it's loading more options because I selected channel. Now, the next thing is we need to add a team ID. So sometimes in the little fields, it'll actually give you like prompts here. Some actions won't give you any prompts, but this is saying to add team ID, and we've got a drop down menu here, so we can click that and we can wait for it to load, right? It's going to Microsoft Power Automate is going to connect to Microsoft Teams, and it's going to based on our account, and it's going to load different options based on our account. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select here, and I'm going to now need to add a channel ID. So we go here and we look for one. I'm going to do my team here, which is Ops and Programs team. And now I can create a message. So to keep this really simple, all that our message is going to be is the body of that email. Well, how do we get that in here? Well, if I click right into this email or message body, you can see that the dynamic content window popped up over here. And if you don't see that, you can, if I click out of this, click back in, you're always going to see it. But sometimes you don't get this little pop-up, but you have that little link that says add dynamic content, and you can click on that and that will actually close it too as well if it's open. So if it's not open, you click on that and then you'll get the dynamic content. And what this dynamic content is the content of the previous actions or triggers that you already have in your flow. So you're going to see this when a new email arrives because we've already have one previous action, which is our trigger, and we have all of these dynamic content of that trigger. So if I scroll over here, you can see there's a number of different things that I can add in here. And the thing that I mentioned we want the message to contain is the body of the message. So we're going to go ahead and click here. Now, what will be in that Teams channel chat is the content of the body of the email that we sent. And now we can add a subject. So the subject of the chat will just be the subject of our email. So if we look over here at our dynamic content, we have subject, the subject of the message. So it gives us the actual title of the dynamic content and then a little descriptor of what that thing actually is, what that content actually is. So kind of like some extra help to determine what is it we're actually looking at here. And we can also search in our dynamic content. So if you don't see what you're looking for, you can just type in subject. Now you have to be really careful because when you're building flows and you have so many actions and so many different actions, you want to make sure you're pulling from the dynamic content of the correct action. So it will always show you in this little gray box here, the name of the action. So when a new email arrives, and then that way we know, okay, it pertains to this, right? But if I've got 100 different actions and I'm pulling dynamic content from, I want to make sure that I know I'm pulling the dynamic content from the right action. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier, where it's super helpful for another reason for renaming your actions and triggers. So let's actually show an example of that by renaming our trigger. I'm going to keep the original name as I mentioned earlier, colon, and we'll just call this inbox, just to signal that it's coming from or it's the email that it's going to pull from is from my inbox, right? So we go ahead and hit enter. I rename that. And now if I go back here, and we click in the field and open the dynamic content, you will see that it's now showing the action or trigger, I should say, as when a new email arrives inbox. So if you rename them, it's going to show that here. And so once again, we can search in here for different dynamic content, and we can now grab this subject to have it pull for the subject. And you can see that the action is only requiring these 5 things up here. The subject is not required. It'll run if you don't have anything in there. But if you try to save without any of these, you're going to get an error. It's going to tell you need to actually fill in the missing required information. Now we have another advanced options here. So let's see what's there. So it gives us one additional advanced option, which is a hosted contents, optional hosted contents JSON array. I'm not going to do anything with that. So we actually have everything we need to save this flow and give it a test. So let's go ahead and do that. Now I did not rename this action here, but because of this very basic flow, and this is just an example, I'm not going to rename that, but I will go down here and I will click save. We can see up at the top here, saving, and now it's saved, and we get the little green ribbon right here. Your flow is ready to go. We recommend you test it, and it's got the little check mark there. So everything looks good. So I want to test this. Now, you can see there's actually the little test icon here. And so if you click on that, you'll get the option to test your flow. But we don't actually have to click test here to test our flow, because this flow runs when a new email arrives in our inbox. So we can actually just go send an email to ourselves and the flow will run. It's all set and ready to go. The times where you want to use your test is if it's a manual trigger. That would be an instance where you could test that way. Now, what we can do before we actually test is, let's click this, go back to previous page, and let's see what happens. We clicked it, it goes back, and we get this little pop-up. Your flow is ready to go. It is turned on and will trigger when you send a new email in your inbox. So we can go ahead and click got it. You can also click here to not show this message again. And now we're on the flow description page, and we're going to look at this a little bit further, but first we're going to go ahead and we're going to go and test. So I'm going to go and I'm going to send an email to myself. Remember, with that subject of test, right? And once that happens, we're going to see if it runs successfully or not. And we sent a test email, and in the body of the email, I put, this is only a test. And now let's see if it ran. So I sent the email and I hopped over to Teams and my Teams channel, and I can see right here, test, this is only a test. So it posted my email, and I'm going to go ahead and, because I'm just testing this, let's go ahead and delete, and then let's hop back here and let's refresh this page here. Now you can, of course, refresh in your browser, or you can hit this little refresh icon down here, which refreshes your flow run history. So we click that, and there we go. Now you can see it, I actually ran it twice, because the first time I ran it, I didn't put anything in the body. So I wanted to demonstrate what it looks like with something in the body. So as you saw in Teams, it posted test in my email subject as the subject of the chat, and then the body of the email was the body, or sorry, the body of the chat was the body of the email. So I ran it twice, and both of them show up here as ran. Now, if we want to see the details of the flow run, we can actually click on this here. You can click on the date and time. And so if we click on that, this is how you can see, like, if a flow failed, you can see the details of where it failed. These ran successfully, but you can actually then see the little green check marks here. And if it failed, on a certain action, you'll get a red X. And then you can, of course, click on these and open them up, and you can see the details of what actually happened here. So if we open up post message in a chat or channel, that action, then we can see the different details here, including the inputs and outputs of the action. And then if we want to go back to the description page, we click the back button there. So this is a great little run history here. It saves for up to 28 days. Now, if you need to make any edits to your flow name, you could actually do that from 2 different locations. We can actually go back in and edit our flow if we click the edit button and then edit with designer. And then up here at the top, this is where we can edit our flow name, right? So I can say like post in Teams when new email arrives, something to that extent. And then I can go over here and click save. That's saved. Now, another way to save it is if we go back to the description page, there's the little edit button on the details box. And if we click that, we again are able to edit our flow name. And another thing that we can edit is a description. It won't automatically give you a description, but as you noticed earlier, the name of the flow is provided by Power Automate based on the triggers and actions in that flow. So it will generate a flow name for you. But I do not recommend using that flow name simply because you want to be really organized, keep organized with your flows. And if you're just using whatever Power Automate gives you, it's going to be confusing, especially if you're sharing flows. So you should have your own process and system for naming your flows. Get with your team and develop some naming conventions to keep things really organized and straightforward, and providing documentation around. And that's why you should also always put in descriptions. So again, have a description conventions for how you're going to describe your flows. So down here, we can just put in anything we want. So this flow will post in Teams based on a new email's content. Be as detailed as you can, of course, and we'll go ahead and we'll click save. And then what we'll see happen here is the little details box is going to update. But of course, it doesn't always happen instantly. Sometimes you need to refresh the page. So let's just go up and refresh our browser. And now we'll see that the description has been added in the details box here. And you'll notice before you didn't even see the word description. There wasn't even anything there. So doesn't make it obvious that there is a description unless you go over and click on the edit here. So a couple other things to note is that the details also tells you who is the owner of the flow. So the person that initially created the flow will appear here. And then you can also see down here under the run history that you can view all runs. So if we click on that, it's going to take you to a different page where it's going to list all of the runs. Whereas if we go back here, this is just more of a snapshot. It's not necessarily going to show you every single run in the history. And then you'll also note you have some other options over here if you need to modify your connections for some reason. And then you can also edit who are the owners of this. And there's a few ways to share this, but this is one of the ways. So I can select team members here and add them. I can add them as a user, or I can add them as an owner. And I can even add a group as an owner. So there's some cool options there as well. So if we go back to the description page, you also have these options for your flow up at the top. So there's some great stuff up here. You can turn your flow on and off from here. You can also share your flow with your team from here. Another way to do it, as we were looking at over here. You can save your flow as, so this gives you the option to save your flow, basically duplicating the flow. and then you can, it's a good option for editing your flow without editing to your original flow, right? You can kind of work on the flow on a duplicate of the flow. And then once you've got stuff figured out, you can go back and then you can modify your original flow. Of course, we can delete from here. We can send a copy of this flow to someone else. We can export the flow, and then we have our analytics page. So that analytics page here will give us a little Power BI display of our flow. So this is another really cool option that Power Automate has with some other Power Platform applications. And then finally, the last option up here is repair tips off, and that's just going to turn off the tips regarding your errors for your flow. So what other options do we have now that we have our first flow set up? Well, one thing that we can do, and this is the last thing that we'll look at, is our flow checker. So we can click this, and this will open the little side panel here. And if we had any errors or warnings, this is where they would be located. Now, if you do have errors or warnings in your flow, you will actually get a little red circle up here that's telling you, hey, there's something wrong with your flow. So what does that look like? Well, if we turn off our flow, we're actually going to get that because our flow is turned off. It's not running. So we got this little icon there. So that's indicating if something's wrong with our flow. Well, we can check it, click on it. We got a warning. This flow is off. And here's some details. It won't trigger until you turn it on. And this explains how to fix it. Turn on this flow or turn this flow on. Turning off our flow also gives us the yellow banner here, and it says there's a potential problem with this flow. See more details. Click on the flow checker. Really appreciate watching, and we will, as always, see you in the next video. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.